Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful concept from the Silent Archive called biological drag. It's this hidden force that the source claims is pretty much governing our potential. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so the source just drops this on us right out of the gate. It's a pretty jarring statement, isn't it? It sets this incredibly clear analytical tone. And it's basically saying that our single biggest obstacle is one we refuse to even see. That's a bold claim. So let's unpack what it actually means.
So, our first section here is all about diagnosis. It's about peeling back the curtain on what we think of as our freedom, only to reveal these invisible structures that might actually be pulling the strings. And this slide really lays out the core conflict. On the left, you've got our most cherished belief, right? That we're the captains of our own ship, totally autonomous. But on the right, you get the source's, well, let's call it the clinical reality, that we're actually caught in something called collective gravity, just struggling to stay afloat in a sea of social viscosity. And this brings us to the main event, biological drag. You know that feeling of resistance when your ambition feels like you're wading through lead? According to the source, that's not some personal failing. It's a systemic pressure to conform that we are all constantly fighting against. So where does all this drag even come from? The source calls the mechanism collective gravity, and it asks us to picture society as this single massive entity, a Leviathan or a hive mind. Every shared opinion, every collective fear, every little social norm, it all adds another particle of mass, making its gravitational pull stronger and stronger, bending our own paths toward the center of the crowd. And here's what that gravity feels like: the crushing pressure of the average. The source argues that whenever we try to break away and do something different, we're not just moving forward. No, we are literally attempting to achieve escape velocity from the event horizon of the ordinary. So, if this is a real force, can we actually understand it? Well, Section 2 tries to do exactly that. It gives us a kind of conceptual model for what it calls the physics of conformity. And the source proposes this formula, the collective drag equation. Now, don't worry, this isn't a math test. Think of it more as a way to visualize the battle. It's a model for the forces holding us back versus the forces that can actually set us free. Let's break this down real quick. The top part of the fraction, that's the forces pulling you in. M hive is just the sheer weight of what everybody else thinks. And sigma conformity is how much you need other people's approval. Now the bottom part, that's your hope. That's your engine for breaking free. V escape is how fast you can intellectually pull away from it all. And I sovereign is the pure raw strength of your own internal logic. So here's the bottom line. If the forces on top are stronger than your forces on the bottom, your collective drag, your DC, is high. And the source has a pretty grim description for that outcome: a controlled descent into the abyss of the mundane. Okay, so after that pretty heavy diagnosis, the source completely shifts gears. This last section isn't about the problem anymore, it's about the solution. It actually lays out a clear, actionable protocol for achieving what it calls sovereignty. And to make the stakes crystal clear, it shows us two potential fates by age 45. On the left, you have the anchored node, someone totally consumed by the drag, a victim of social liquidation, just another brick in a wall they didn't even build. But on the right, you have the architect, the person who broke free, who achieved what it calls decoupling, and who now defines their own path. So how do you become the architects? Well, the source gives us a strategy: the decoupling protocol. The entire goal is to consciously, deliberately, move yourself away from that collective mass and toward becoming a sovereign individual, a singularity. The protocol itself has 3 steps. First is validation liquidation. You have to audit your goals and cut any connection to the applause of the crowd. Second is mass reduction. This is about practicing what the source calls invisibility, shrinking your social footprint, withdrawing your data. The less the machine knows about you, the less it can pull on you. And finally, the escape velocity. This is where you build such intense focus and momentum in your own direction that the drag just can't keep up. And this is the end goal. When you do this, you're no longer just a victim of that curve created by the collective. No, you become the one who defines the straight line, your own unwavering path. As the source says, the signal of I becomes eternal. So we end with the source's final audit of our freedom. It leaves us with this really powerful question, turning the focus away from just blind ambition and toward a much deeper analysis of resistance. The ultimate question isn't about your speed, it's about identifying and overcoming the drag. So what is holding you back? Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty profound. We're going to conduct an audit of your freedom. We'll be exploring a framework that claims to expose the invisible forces that are quietly steering your choices, and more importantly, a protocol designed to help you achieve what it calls personal sovereignty. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll try to understand this invisible prison called the gravitational hive. Then, we'll take a look at who gets trapped inside it, the anchored node. After that, we'll unpack the escape plan, the decoupling protocol. And finally, we'll see the destination, the architect's ascent. All right, so let's start with the big problem here. The source material we're looking at argues that we are all, whether we know it or not, caught in this powerful, unseen field that it calls the gravitational hive. And this really gets to the heart of it. We all like to think our choices are 100% our own, right? That we're these independent satellites orbiting our own destiny. But the core idea here is that we are constantly fighting against this biological drag, a pull we can't always see, but we can definitely feel. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about physical gravity. This is a social gravity. It's the relentless pull of consensus, created by the sheer mass of agreement all around you. Every shared opinion, every trend, every little thing you should do, it all adds weight, bending your reality towards the average, right toward the center of the crowd. And this is where it gets really interesting. The source actually gives this system a name, the Leviathan. And it doesn't need chains to keep you in place. It just needs to get heavier. It cleverly feeds on that deep human need we all have for belonging by giving us communities and identities. In return, our participation tethers us to the collective, making sure our potential is used to maintain the hive. The source even maps this out with an equation. Now, don't get hung up on the complex math here. The real takeaway is the idea behind it, that social pressure isn't just a feeling, it's a real, quantifiable force acting on your life. So let's break down what's actually in that equation. The drag gets stronger with the mass of the hive and your own susceptibility to it, that need for outside approval. Your only defense, your counterbalance, is your intellectual escape velocity and the strength of your sovereign identity. You can see how this works, right? If the forces pulling you down are stronger than your ability to pull away, you're basically in a controlled descent. So what happens when someone just gives in, when they completely succumb to this drag? Well, they stop being an individual in motion and become something else entirely, what the source calls the anchored node. This is the shadow of the unrefined mind. The source uses this really powerful image to describe this. Imagine the feeling of a bird that believes the air is made of stone. That's the state of the anchored node. This is the person who never built their own internal framework, and they end up as a victim of social liquidation, where their own identity is just completely dissolved into the collective. And the source pinpoints a specific moment, age 45. This is flagged as a critical turning point. It's when the anchored node is said to have this horrifying moment of clarity, when they realize they're not a dynamic person anymore, but a permanent fixture in the landscape, just a brick in a wall that somebody else built. So not only have they lost their own momentum, their mass now actually adds to the collective gravity. They don't have a unique signal, no monument to their life. They've become part of the very prison that holds other people down. So here you have it, the two potential paths laid out side by side. It's a pretty stark contrast, isn't it? You're either a victim of the curve that the mass creates, or you're the one who defines the straight line. You're either a brick, or you're the builder. And this, of course, leads us to the most important question of all. If this whole thing is a gravitational trap, how in the world do you get out? How do you break free? Well, the source doesn't just leave us with the problem, it offers a solution, a very clear three-stage process for achieving escape velocity. It's called the decoupling protocol. This is the absolute core of the strategy. You can think of it like a three-stage launch sequence designed specifically to overcome that immense force of collective drag. So let's break down each stage. Okay, step 1 is intense. It's called validation liquidation. It's basically a ruthless internal audit of your needs. You have to identify every single goal you have that's really just designed to win the hive's approval. The rule is simple. If it requires the crowd's applause to feel real, you have to sever that tether. Second is mass reduction. This is all about practicing what's called the invisibility technique. You essentially withdraw your data from the social simulation. The less the system knows about where you're headed, the less it can adjust its gravity to try and catch you. If you are unknown, you become unpullable. And the final step is achieving escape velocity. This is about building an internal momentum, a focus so powerful that it just exceeds the drag from your environment. Your personal architecture has to become so sharp, so fast, that the gravity of the Leviathan simply can't get a grip on your edges. So, what happens if you actually pull all of this off? What's the end game? After you've successfully decoupled, what do you become? The source calls this final state the architect. And the contrast is just stark. The anchored node is completely crushed by collective drag, while the architect has managed to reduce it to almost zero. This is the result of mastering the law of collective gravity, a state the source calls total decoupling. So by that same age, 45, the architect has reached an altitude where the noise of the crowd is just a tiny, soundless dot way off in the distance. You're no longer being pulled by its gravity. You are now your own center of mass. This is the ultimate declaration of sovereignty. It marks the end of your part in the simulation of us, that collective identity. And it's the beginning of your own, clear, powerful, and eternal signal of I. And that's where we'll wrap up this explainer. What this framework really presents is a choice, isn't it? Be absorbed by the mass or architect your own escape. Your archive becomes your personal repository of sovereign thought. So the real question isn't just what this audit reveals, but what line you will choose to draw.